You're the first for me. I've never reprimanded a guest for manhandling a painting before. When you were pulling it out and that foam core was there.
I'm glad you're taking care of my painting.
I'm trying to. So what can you tell me about this lovely Frederick Remington portrait?
Well, Lee Feppiger was my great-grandfather.
That is this gentleman.
This is this gentleman.
Yes.
Born in 1858, died in 1920. And he was a friend of Frederick Remington, who in 1896 painted his portrait as part of a military series in El Paso.
Frederick Remington was born in 1861 and became one of the most influential American artists at the turn of the 20th century, especially associated with the American West. Largely self-trained, he developed a powerful visual language through painting, illustration, and sculpture, capturing soldiers, cowboys, and frontier life with remarkable vitality. His strength lay not in academic polish, but in an instinctive grasp of movement, light, and character. The work here is an oil-on-canvas portrait painted in 1896 during a period when Remington was increasingly confident in formal portraiture. The subject is presented with a strong, upright presence, reinforced by decisive contrasts of light and shadow. Remington carefully models the face, while the background is treated more loosely and abstractly, a deliberate choice that pushes the viewer's attention toward the figure itself. This balance between detail and suggestion is characteristic of his mature style. The composition conveys both individuality and authority, reflecting Remington's interest in military figures and personal identity. The painting remains in very good condition, a testament to long-term care. Of particular historical importance is the survival of a personal letter written by Remington to the sitter, which provides rare insight into his working relationships and adds depth to the understanding of this portrait within his broader body of work. And this piece, together with the letter, would be something that I would value at auction between $600,000
Oh my goodness.
and $800,000.
I was hoping I would be wildly exuberant. I am.
And certainly for insurance at in excess of $800,000.
My goodness.
Is just terrific.
Can I keep you around so that I take good care of it?
Perhaps.
Well, it's been in my family for over 80 years. It was purchased somewhere around 1930 by my great-grandparents.
In Mexico or in the United States?
I believe it was purchased in Mexico.
Okay.
And the painting for some time was in bad condition, and it was hanging behind a door.
Behind a door?
Behind a door in the house.
Here.
If that door was open, then you couldn't see the painting.
This painting immediately commands attention, not only for its quality, but for its extraordinary history. It was painted in 1904 by Diego Rivera at a moment when he was just 18 years old and only beginning his artistic journey. Works from this early period are extremely rare, with only a handful known today. Even so, this painting already reveals the foundations of what would later define Rivera's career. Here we see an early 20th century oil on canvas depicting a laborer, a subject that would become central to Rivera's lifelong focus on the working people of Mexico. The handling of form and the solid, grounded presence of the figure hint at the monumental sensibility that would later emerge fully in his murals. Technically and thematically, this work offers a remarkable glimpse into the formation of his artistic language. The painting is signed and dated in the lower right, Diego Rivera, 1904. The signature itself is revealing as it reflects a youthful, almost academic hand, rather than the confident, formal signature associated with his mature period. This detail strongly supports its early date. For decades, the painting's whereabouts were unknown. After being purchased around 1930, it effectively disappeared from official records until it resurfaced and was authenticated in the mid-1990s. Conservation work, including lining the canvas, has stabilized the piece, and it now presents in very fine, restored condition. So, trifectas usually pay pretty well. I would be putting a retail estimate on the piece of between $800,000 $1 million.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Unbelievable. I did not expect that. I'm astounded. I really don't know what to say.
Behind a door?
Behind a door. It was behind the door.
My great-great-great-grandfather purchased the painting originally in Cincinnati. My grandmother always thought it was a George Caleb Bingham painting, and then we had it appraised, and he told us that it was not by Bingham. He identified the artist as James Henry Beard.
And there was a title of it?
The Illustrious Guest.
Exactly. The scene unfolds inside a tavern, or inn, a familiar setting in 19th century American genre painting, and Beard fills it with layered narrative detail. Clay sits calmly at the center, still wearing his long traveling coat, reading a newspaper as if unaware of the attention surrounding him. Around him, the tavern comes alive with curiosity and quiet excitement. Figures peer toward him, examine his cane, and scrutinize the guest register, where Beard cleverly inscribed his own name above Clay's, inviting the viewer into the act of recognition. Beard's compositional skill lies in his ability to guide the eye across multiple episodes within a single space. From the bartender and bottles at one end, through the cluster of onlookers, and finally to the women and children positioned at the edge of the scene, the painting captures social boundaries and customs of the time. Even the traveling bags, including a carpet bag, reinforce the idea of movement and public life intersecting with the everyday. Although Beard is not typically considered a first-tier artist and is more often associated with animal subjects, this painting stands apart. Its historical specificity, narrative complexity, and direct engagement with a major figure of American history elevate it far beyond his usual output. As a result, this work functions not only as a genre scene, but as a significant document of American cultural and political life, fully worthy of museum-level consideration. If we were to put this into an auction, I talked to my colleagues and we said we'd probably at least put an auction estimate on this of $300,000 to $500,000.
Oh my gosh, really?
And we were speculating things like this that have had estimates like that have gone into the seven figures when they go to auction, because people just go crazy over them because they haven't seen anything like this at auction.
Wow.
It's an important piece of American history. This could hang in a museum. It's great to see it in here.
Thank you. What can I say? Wow.
Ernie Barnes was a former NFL player. He played for the Jets. But after football, he found art as being, I guess, part of his livelihood. And we all are familiar with Sugar Shack, and there's some other well-known pieces, but my father and Ernie made friends, and he was able to purchase this piece. And this actually sat on top of our fire mantle in our home in Santa Barbara, California.
This is an oil on canvas by Ernie Barnes, created in 1971, entitled 4th and 1. Barnes is a remarkable figure in American art history, having first built a career as a professional NFL player before fully committing himself to painting. After football, he translated the physical intensity, rhythm, and emotion of the game into a highly personal visual language defined by elongated, muscular figures and sweeping motion. In this work, Barnes captures the explosive moment of a crucial football play. The compressed bodies, straining limbs, and colliding helmets convey sound, force, and urgency, almost as if the scene is vibrating. The composition is dense and tightly packed, reinforcing the pressure of the moment, while the exaggerated anatomy emphasizes power rather than realism. This approach is consistent with Barnes's broader practice, where movement and emotion matter more than anatomical accuracy. And it wasn't on Marvin Gaye's album, but it's still a very valuable piece, I think. If I were to put a value on it for insurance purposes, I would make this around $650,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Awesome piece.
Amazing.
Well, this painting has been in our family for over 90 years. It was given to my great-grandmother by Norman Rockwell. My great-grandmother was his aunt.
And what do you know about the painting?
Well, it's a 1919 Collier's cover from March of 1919, and that's about all I know.
What is fascinating about Rockwell is that he always knew he wanted to be an artist, and he showed remarkable talent from a very early age. Born in 1894, Rockwell was already enrolled in formal art training by the age of 14, and by 1910 he left high school to devote himself entirely to art. At just 18, he became art director of Boy's Life, a role that sharpened his instinct for narrative and character. Although Rockwell is most often associated with the Saturday Evening Post, Collier's magazine was its principal rival in the early 20th century. Rockwell produced only 4 covers for Collier's, all in 1919, which makes this painting especially significant. Titled The Little Model, it is an oil on canvas that perfectly illustrates his gift for visual storytelling. The scene shows a young woman in worn stockings, broom in hand, imitating the elegant figure in a fashion poster behind her. The contrast between aspiration and reality is gentle, humorous, and deeply human. The inclusion of the dog adds warmth and immediacy, reinforcing Rockwell's ability to capture everyday moments with empathy and clarity. Even at this early stage, the composition, expression, and narrative economy reveal the foundations of the style that would later define Rockwell as one of the most influential American illustrators of the 20th century. Around the time of the late 90s, his work started to consistently bring about 6 figures. So I would think in today's market, you would want to have a replacement value on this of about $500,000.
Better get more insurance.
So are you surprised to hear
Yeah,
that?
yeah. Very surprised.
Thank you so much for bringing it
You're
in.
welcome. Wow, I didn't realize.
My husband was a student at Washington State University, and he had an art professor by the name of Clifford Still. Then as the years went by, he went on and got his doctorate and came back to Washington State. And the chairman of his department, they owned the painting, they gave it to us as a housewarming.
When I see this painting signed and dated 1937, it immediately places us early in Clifford Still's career. The subject is Grand Coulee at the moment the dam was being built, a monumental engineering project set in the landscape of Washington State, near where Still grew up, studied, and graduated. At this time, he was still working figuratively, and that is clear in the recognizable forms and the sense of place. What is striking, however, is that even in this representational phase, the painting already shows qualities that anticipate his later work. The land feels massive and forceful, not gently descriptive. He was clearly more interested in scale, structure, and emotional weight than in literal detail. Still would soon become one of the key figures in the development of abstract expressionism, alongside artists such as Rothko, de Kooning, Franz Klein, and Jackson Pollock. Mark Rothko introduced him to Peggy Guggenheim, which led to his first solo exhibition in New York. By the late 1930s and early 1940s, Still began moving away from figurative painting toward abstraction, earlier than many of his peers. Seen in that light, this work is an important early example. It captures Still at a turning point, rooted in landscape and representation, yet already pushing toward the powerful, abstract language that would later define his place in 20th century American art. Given the importance of this painting, I believe that this shouldn't be insured for anything less than $500,000.
Really?
Yeah. So in fact, it may turn out that I'm being rather conservative when I say $500,000.
Well, but that gives us a basis of where to put our insurance.
I have to say, in all my years on the roadshow, it's probably the most exciting find I've had.
Oh, really?
And I'm absolutely thrilled that you brought it in today.
Well, thank you.
So thank you.
My father gave me this painting that I remember it so well when I was a little child in Yorkshire, England. And this lady is my grandmother. She lived in a wonderful house called the Gleddings in Halifax, Yorkshire. And the painting was painted by Robert Henry.
Yes.
And he was a friend of the family. She considered herself a Bostonian.
This is a portrait by Robert Henri, painted at a pivotal moment in his career and in the history of American art. Henri was born in 1865 and trained at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts under Thomas Anschutz, alongside artists such as William Merritt Chase. By 1908, the very year this portrait was painted, Henri had become the intellectual leader and founder of what came to be known as the Ashcan School, a movement that rejected academic polish in favor of immediacy, realism, and expressive brushwork. The circumstances of this painting align closely with Henri's documented travels. After spending the summer in Holland, records show that he traveled to England in August to execute a commissioned portrait, and this work fits precisely within that timeline. What makes the painting so compelling is the way it synthesizes multiple influences. The dry, energetic brushwork and direct handling of paint are unmistakably Ashcan in spirit, while the elegance of the pose, the refined handling of costume, and the compositional balance recall the society portraiture of William Merritt Chase. The sitter's ruddy complexion, strikingly bold for its time, gives the face a vivid, almost confrontational presence, while still retaining dignity and poise. Details such as the jeweled ring and the feather fan function not only as markers of status, but also as carefully considered decorative elements that enliven the composition. I think there would be many people who would want it. I believe you should probably insure this somewhere in the area of $250,000 to $300,000.
Oh, no.
Because
No.
it is a...
Oh, my God.
It's early. It's at the time of the founding of the Ashcan School, and you've been a very good caretaker of it.
I'm floored.
Well,
Are you
Pat,
sure about that?
I am sure about that. It's wonderful.
I'm kind of flabbergasted here.
You've brought in a very interesting painting by the artist Joseph Kleitsch, and I understand you know a fair amount about him.
He lived and worked in Southern California from around 1920 to the mid-1930s, and I lived in Laguna Beach then, grew up there, and this is a picture of the way the town looked at that time.
Joseph Kleitsch was one of the most important figures of California Impressionism in the early 20th century. Born in Hungary, he received formal training in Budapest, Paris, and Munich, and by the age of 17, he was already an accomplished portrait painter, even completing a portrait of Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria. He came to the United States in 1901, settled first in Chicago, and taught at the Art Institute while continuing to focus largely on portraiture. Everything changed when he moved to Southern California around 1920 and settled in Laguna Beach. There he became captivated by the landscape, the coastal light, and everyday life of the town. This painting captures Laguna Beach as it appeared during that period. Based on the style and handling, it was likely painted in the late 1920s or early 1930s. The label on the reverse identifies the subject as the local drugstore, a familiar landmark that Kleitsch documented with warmth and immediacy. The work shows exactly why Kleitsch was celebrated as a master colorist. The light is luminous, the palette vibrant, and the brushwork confident and expressive, reflecting both Impressionist influence and his own painterly energy. Executed in oil on canvas, the painting feels spontaneous yet carefully observed. Kleitsch later traveled to Northern California and returned briefly to Europe, but by 1931 he was back in the United States, passing away at the age of 49. His early death makes works like this comparatively rare, and it stands as a vivid record of Laguna Beach at a formative moment in California art history. If this were in a gallery, most likely in California, although his work is collected elsewhere, gallery price would be $500,000.
Oh, really? That's quite nice to know.
Yeah. When we saw the painting, we were all very excited, so it's a pleasure to be able to talk about it.
Oh, it's certainly all my pleasure.
This belonged to my great-granduncle. He managed a hotel on the west side of New York, and he had a room that had a skylight, and so he let Thomas Benton use it as his studio and other artists from the Student League. And some of these paintings were gifts for using the room, I believe, and they bought some of them. And this Joseph Stella was an early work, and he had Stellas and Bentons and all kinds of wonderful associations.
This is an early work by Joseph Stella, an artist who played a significant role in bringing modernism into American art. Stella was born in Italy and came to the United States at about 19 years old, where he studied at the Art Students League in New York. Early in his career, he absorbed academic training, but he soon moved toward a more personal and expressive style that bridged realism and modern abstraction. One of the remarkable aspects of this piece is its condition. Being kept under glass for decades protected the surface from smoke and environmental damage, which was especially important in an era when studios and homes were filled with cigarette smoke. The frame is also notable. This white and gold frame, with its restrained and elegant design, was popular among artists such as Georgia O'Keeffe and Arthur Dove, and it complements the painting's modern sensibility while adding historical coherence. I would appraise your painting for both insurance value and for if it were to sell in an art gallery at about $250,000. I feel it's I've just been consulting with my colleagues. I think it's quite a spectacular piece. You're lucky to have this.
Me.
Lucky to have this inheritance.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, congratulations.
It's amazing.
So my great aunt was an artist, and she studied under Hans Hofmann and wound up becoming friends with several of the other artists that studied along with him. And one of them was a woman named Lynn Drexler. Lynn wound up leaving a number of pieces with my aunt, and when my aunt passed in 2009, I inherited them. And so I've always loved them. About a year and a half ago, I saw a New York Times article that talked about Lynn Drexler and how this artist who had been in obscurity for decades was all of a sudden getting interest.
These are works by Lynn Drexler, an artist whose career is closely tied to the rise of abstract expressionism in post-war America. Drexler was born in 1,928 inches, Virginia, and moved to New York in the mid-1950s, where she studied with Hans Hofmann. Hofmann, a German-born painter and one of the most influential teachers of the 20th century, emphasized color, spatial tension, and emotional intensity, and his ideas shaped an entire generation of artists working in New York and Provincetown. Drexler absorbed these lessons deeply. She became known as a gifted colorist, allowing color relationships to lead the composition rather than relying strictly on form or line. Both of these paintings are oil on canvas, signed and dated on the back, a practice she favored so the surface of the painting would remain visually uninterrupted. The smaller work, titled Redwood Time and dated 1959, and the larger untitled painting from 1961 fall squarely within her most sought-after period, the late 1950s and early 1960s. For many years, artists like Drexler were overshadowed by the more celebrated male figures of abstract expressionism. In recent decades, however, renewed scholarship, major exhibitions, and focused collecting have brought significant attention to women artists of this movement. As a result, Drexler's work has entered major collections and achieved strong results at auction. And they've also done very well at auction. If the smaller painting were to come to auction, I believe that value would be $50,000 to $70,000.
Wow. Wow. Who would have known? Just a small little painting that I've had on my wall for 15 years. That's amazing. That's fantastic.
I have a number of Andrew Wyeth signed prints, but I've always wanted to have an original painting. And I started looking in earnest when I'd saved enough money in 1985, and I had a dealer reach me, and he said that he had this painting. It's called The Trammel, and he quoted a price to me.
This is an original watercolor by Andrew Wyeth titled The Trammel, and it stands as a strong example of his mature work. Wyeth was born in 1,917 inches Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania, and remained committed to realism throughout his life, even as abstract expressionism dominated the American art world. His first exhibition in 1937 was a sellout, establishing his reputation very early, and he continued to work primarily in Pennsylvania and Maine until his death in January 2009. The painting dates from 1985, the same year it was acquired, and it is signed in the lower left. What immediately distinguishes this work is Wyeth's mastery of watercolor, a notoriously unforgiving medium. He skillfully leaves areas of the paper unpainted, allowing the white of the sheet to become light itself, visible in the window reflection and the sheen on the leather boot. His sensitivity to texture is exceptional. The fur hat feels tactile, almost tangible, and the worn surfaces of the old objects reveal his lifelong fascination with utilitarian rural artifacts. The trammel itself, originally a device used to suspend cooking pots over an open fire, is reimagined here as a hat rack, transforming a humble functional object into a quiet psychological presence. There is also the intriguing element of a secondary image on the reverse, a sketch known only through documentation, and the fact that Wyeth framed the work himself adds another layer of personal involvement. Viewing the reverse would not diminish the work's value as long as the original frame is preserved. This is a very nice example of his work, and I think you would be fine at insuring the work at $450,000.
Wow, that is a nice price.
Is that a real wow?
That's a real wow. And I might throw in, are you kidding? Which is what people oftentimes say, but it's nice to know that that's what's happened to that painting.
The artist is Joe Leyendecker, and he was known to us as Uncle Joe. And he was a friend of our grandfather's, and they became friends at the turn of the century. So the earliest record we have of their relationship is 1898, something like that. We don't know how good the friendship was, but we imagine that it was a very close friendship.
I see.
Sadly, our grandfather took his own life.
Oh.
When my parents were married in 1931, Uncle Joe gave this painting as a wedding gift. He even told them he wanted to repaint the background in gold to celebrate the marriage. That is why the painting looks different from how it first began. After adding the gold background, he changed his monogram to a full signature, as if to mark the moment as something personal and complete.
Joseph Leyendecker was one of the defining figures of the golden age of American illustration. Born in 1874, he trained in Chicago and Paris before returning to the United States, where his crisp draftsmanship, confident composition, and modern sense of design quickly set him apart. By the early 20th century, his images shaped how Americans visualized everyday life, aspiration, and identity, particularly through his long association with the Saturday Evening Post. This painting fits squarely within that legacy. The handling is highly decorative, yet controlled, with strong drawing beneath the paint and a sophisticated use of color that immediately reads as Leyendecker. What is especially telling here is the surface evidence of its original function as an illustration, the clarity of the forms, the graphic strength, and the sense that the image was designed to reproduce clearly for print. These qualities are exactly why Leyendecker was so influential, not only on the public but also on later illustrators, including Norman Rockwell. I think an auction estimate, a conservative auction estimate in 2021, is probably $150,000 to $200,000. Now,
If I saw this painting come to auction, however, would I be surprised if it came closer to 200,000 to 300,000 or more? I would not. In fact, I would very much fully expect that that would happen. I think for insurance purposes in 2021, I would probably insure the painting for $400,000.
Well, thank you, David.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for bringing
All
it
right.
in.
Okay.
This was a wedding gift to my parents when they got married in 1940 in Chicago. A friend had this painting commissioned as a special gift to them. I got it when they moved out of Chicago and they were moving to a smaller house, and some of the items in the house I acquired. That was about more than 30 years ago.
Wow. Joseph Henry Sharp occupies a central place within the Taos School, a group of artists devoted to portraying the landscapes of northern New Mexico and the lives of Native American communities there. Born in Cincinnati, Ohio, Sharp lost his hearing at a young age, yet he quickly discovered a natural talent for drawing. He trained at the Cincinnati Academy of Art and further refined his skills through repeated study trips to Europe. His first journey to New Mexico in 1883 proved decisive, as the region's people, light, and culture became the foundation of his mature work. Sharp returned to Taos in the 1890s and gained recognition through commissions for Harper's Weekly, documenting Native American life with unusual sensitivity and respect. Although financial success came slowly, his reputation grew steadily. His paintings were acquired by the Smithsonian, admired by Theodore Roosevelt, and later collected in great number by the family of William Randolph Hearst. By 1912, Sharp settled permanently in Taos, fully immersed in the environment that defined his art. This painting is an oil on canvas depicting a quiet exchange between two Native American figures in Taos. The composition emphasizes human presence within place, a hallmark of Sharp's work. The surface shows rich impasto with thickly applied paint, creating a textured play of light and shadow. That handling of paint, combined with a nuanced sense of illumination, gives the scene both intimacy and permanence. The work remains in superb original condition, showing no evidence of tears, paint loss, or structural damage. This painting, if it were in a gallery, I would expect it to sell in the range of $400,000.
$400,000.
Yes.
It's a lot.
Yes. It's a very exciting painting.
Wow.
Collectors, they love to find things that have just come to market.
Thank you for your appraisal.
Golly, I guess it was 1963. I did my junior year in Madrid, Spain, and I lived right close to the Joaquin Sorolla Museum in Madrid. Later, I moved to Cambridge with my first husband, whom I met in Spain. It was about 1965, 1966, and we found some of Jane Peterson's work, and he purchased several of the harbor scenes, and I just fell in love with this.
This is an oil on canvas by Jane Peterson, a painter whose career bridges American Impressionism and early modern Expressionism. Peterson was born in Elgin, Illinois, trained in New York, and like many ambitious artists of her generation, traveled abroad to deepen her vision. Her time in Spain proved decisive. There, she studied with Joaquin Sorolla, absorbed his mastery of light, and formed a close friendship that shaped her palette and confidence. Sorolla also introduced her to Louis Comfort Tiffany, with whom she later traveled and painted, including scenes from Tiffany's gardens on Long Island. Peterson continued her education in Paris, living near Gertrude and Leo Stein, who in turn introduced her to Picasso, Cézanne, and Matisse. This exposure transformed her work from softer, impressionistic tones into a far bolder, color-driven approach. The painting titled The Answer reflects that maturity. The composition centers on a solitary, contemplative figure, rendered with expressive color and psychological tension. Small narrative details, such as the broken beads and the act of writing, invite speculation and give the work its quiet mystery. Exhibited with the Allied Artists of America in 1929, this painting stands as a vivid example of Peterson's independence, ambition, and distinctly modern voice. And it's very colorful and brilliant, and so for all those reasons, I think it's very desirable in the marketplace. And I think that a gallery in New York would be asking $300,000.
Where's the chair? Now I need that chair. Oh, I'm so excited. Well, I just have always loved it. I mean, it really spoke to me.
My mom was born in Europe. She went to Switzerland and skied and loved Switzerland. And when she immigrated to the United States, she brought this picture with her, kept it in her bedroom wall all the time, and would tell me about how wonderful Switzerland was.
He was born in 1,891 inches Tyrol and is best known for his alpine landscapes and winter scenes. Walde was originally trained as an architect in Vienna, where he was part of the same cultural circle as Gustav Klimt and Egon Schiele before turning his full attention to painting. By the mid-1920s, Walde began concentrating on skiing and mountain subjects around Kitzbühel and Innsbruck, becoming one of the earliest artists to treat winter sport and alpine life as serious pictorial themes. This work dates to around the mid-1930s when his style was fully developed. The scene is known as Einsamer Berghof, or Lonely Mountain Farmhouse, a subject he returned to repeatedly. One of the most distinctive features of Walde's work is his use of heavy impasto, with paint built up thickly on the surface, sometimes rising several millimeters from the board. That texture allows him to create a striking contrast between brilliant white snow and deep, cool shadows. The small figures and isolated cabin emphasize a sense of quiet, self-contained alpine life, which is central to his vision. The painting is executed in oil on board and remains in its original frame, a detail that supports its authenticity. The accumulated surface texture and natural aging are consistent with Walde's materials and working method, confirming it as a genuine and characteristic example from his mature period. So it could stand a little bit of a cleaning. If I were to put an auction estimate on it, I'd put it at $200,000 to $300,000.
Oh, that's terrible. Oh, it was such a nice picture to just sort of have around.
It's the nicest thing I've seen all day.
Wow. Thank you very much. You made my day.
Been in my husband's family for a very long time. It was passed down to his parents, and then after his parents passed away, it was passed on to us.
Krieghoff was born in the Netherlands and trained within a European tradition that valued finely observed genre painting. He later carried that training with him to Canada in the mid-19th century, adapting it to the rugged conditions and distinctive culture of places such as the Quebec City region. During his lifetime, his paintings were extremely popular because they offered detailed visual records of Canadian life, combining realism with warmth and humor. Because of that popularity, Krieghoff's work has been widely copied, and authenticity is always a critical consideration. Here, the quality of the paint handling, the compositional confidence, and the consistent stylistic elements strongly align with Krieghoff's known oeuvre. The presence of the original frame, even with later overpainting, further supports the period integrity of the piece. Oh my God! It's a wonderful example of his work. For insurance and retail purposes, in excess of $350,000.
I can't believe it, Colin. I just can't believe it.
Believe it and insure it right away.
I will. I can't believe it. I just can't believe it.
My brother-in-law bought the painting about 30 years ago. And the story is that he studied the Hudson River Valley artists for quite some time and went to New York and went to a gallery and asked to buy a Hudson River Valley painting. And the gallery owner said he didn't have any.
Jasper Francis Cropsey was one of the leading painters of the Hudson River School, born in 1823 and active throughout the 19th century. His work reflects the American landscape tradition shaped first by Thomas Cole and later by Frederick Edwin Church, combining romantic atmosphere with careful observation of nature. Cropsey traveled widely in Europe and across the northeastern United States, yet the Hudson River region remained central to his artistic vision. This painting depicts Greenwood Lake, a natural lake on the border of New York and New Jersey, and one of Cropsey's favorite subjects. He returned to this location many times, and the composition here closely matches other known examples. The painting is signed and dated 1881. While slightly later than his prime period around 1870, it avoids the rigid formulas sometimes seen in his later works. What makes this piece especially appealing is the contrast between the moody, gray sky and the vivid greens and warm oranges of the landscape. A small figure in a boat introduces scale and narrative interest, while the grouping of cows, a familiar element in Cropsey's work, grounds the scene in pastoral American life. The painting is oil on canvas and was later laid down onto masonite, a conservation practice once used before modern standards. Minor surface compression is visible but correctable, and the original frame remains intact. Overall, the subject, execution, and condition firmly support this as a strong and authentic example of Cropsey's work. If this painting were offered in a gallery in New York, the selling price would probably be $300,000.
Oh my heavens!
It's amazing. It's absolutely.
Oh my gosh!
This is fresh to the market. You've owned it for so long, or your family's owned it for so long, and it's really got all the right ingredients.
I've had it for years and I love it, and this was painted of Charleston in 1854. We didn't become a state until 1863.
Oh my goodness. So not only is it before the Civil War,
right,
it's before statehood for West Virginia.
Correct.
So this scene of Charleston was at this point Charleston, Virginia.
Right.
It's a wonderful panoramic landscape by the artist Edward Beyer, signed lower right and dated 1854. Edward Beyer was a German-born artist who emigrated to the United States in the late 1840s and became one of the most important visual chroniclers of Virginia before the Civil War. Trained in the European tradition of detailed landscape observation, he was drawn to Virginia by its famed mineral springs and soon began recording the region with extraordinary precision. This painting, signed and dated 1854, depicts Charleston at a time when it was still Charleston, Virginia, nearly a decade before West Virginia achieved statehood in 1863. It is a sweeping panoramic view showing the Canal River, surrounding hills, and the early town laid out along the valley. Beyer was known for producing a series of roughly 40 panoramic views of Virginia, which were exhibited publicly and admired with magnifying glasses for their dense detail. Many of these views were later issued as lithographs in the Album of Virginia, now preserved in Richmond. Here, the clarity is remarkable. Tiny figures, boats, buildings, and roads animate the landscape, while the mountains retain a fresh, luminous quality that belies the painting's age. The restored surface is stable and vibrant, allowing the viewer to fully appreciate Beyer's intent. With further research, this work may well prove to be one of his original panoramic series, making it both a beautiful landscape and a rare historical document of Charleston before the Civil War. People on the water, the beautiful, beautiful mountains, and it's so fresh it looks as if it was done yesterday. What a treasure. I would value it for insurance at $250,000.
Well, that's nice. That's very nice.
That's
very nice.
So this is a painting that I was given when my grandmother passed away. It always hung right above her bed. Her dad, I'm guessing, would have given it to her after she spent the summer at a dude ranch when she was 19 in like the 40s. When I got it, there was a mosquito underneath the glass. So I took it out to the front yard and I opened it up to get the mosquito out so I could take it with me to college. And then it kind of scared me a little. I closed it back up immediately because it looked like it might be real.
This is an original painting by Henry Francois Farny, a French-born American artist best known for his sensitive depictions of Native American life. Farny was born in France and immigrated to Pennsylvania as a child. While living there, he developed close relationships with Native communities, particularly the Seneca, which sparked a lifelong fascination with indigenous culture. He later spent significant time with the Sioux, who formally adopted him and gave him the name Longboots, referenced by the small circular cipher beneath his signature. The painting dates to around 1890, a period widely regarded as the peak of Farny's career. What makes this work especially compelling is the dense grouping of figures, a highly desirable characteristic in his oeuvre. Farny consistently portrayed Native Americans in calm, harmonious settings, emphasizing dignity and everyday life rather than conflict. This approach clearly distinguishes him from contemporaries such as Frederick Remington or Charles M. Russell, whose works often focused on violence and confrontation. The composition here conveys a quiet, almost meditative atmosphere. The figures are closely knit, creating a sense of community and narrative depth. The surface handling and tonal balance reinforce Farny's intention to present Native life with respect and serenity. Kind of peaceful, tranquil way, and you can see that in this painting. He didn't ever really bring conflict into his work as some of the other artists from that time did, Charles Russell and Remington. So if we were going to put this in an auction today, I would suggest an estimate of $200,000 to $300,000.
Oh my goodness. So I'll keep it away from my dog.
Little girl is me at age 5, and the little boy in the pseudo spacesuit was a young neighbor. And we were posing for my stepfather, John Falter, who was one of the artists painting for the Saturday Evening Post.
This is an original illustration by John Falter, created as a cover image for the Saturday Evening Post. When discussing American illustration, Norman Rockwell is often mentioned first, yet Rockwell himself regarded Falter as one of the most gifted illustrators of his generation. Falter worked at the height of magazine illustration, when a single image needed to tell a complete story at a glance. The scene was developed from live models posed in Falter's studio outside San Francisco, while the background was shaped entirely by his imagination. This balance between observation and invention is central to his work. The figures feel immediate and believable, while the setting supports a gentle narrative rather than overwhelming it. Falter's strengths lie in confident drawing, clear composition, and an understated emotional warmth that invites the viewer into a quiet moment. Although his name long stood in the shadow of Rockwell, this illustration demonstrates why Falter occupies an important place in the history of American magazine art. This subject, though, is just as wonderful. As a pre-sale auction estimate, something like this we would put between $100,000 to $150,000. And I'm sure, since this is an heirloom in your family, this is something that you're going to want to keep. And
Absolutely.
I would say for an insurance value, you put at least $175,000 on it.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, these two paintings have been in my family for probably 150 years and probably were bought by my great-great-grandmother in the late 1800s. I had copies of them hanging on the wall in my office at work, and I work at a university.
These are two late 19th century watercolors by Winslow Homer, one of the greatest American watercolorists, alongside John Singer Sargent. Homer turned seriously to watercolor around 1873 while working in Gloucester, and by the late 1870s, he had reached a remarkable level of confidence and economy in the medium. Both works here date to about 1878, a particularly strong period in his career. The watercolor closest to you is executed almost entirely in transparent washes with only the faintest suggestion of pencil beneath. The other combines pencil underdrawing, watercolor, and subtle touches of gouache, a layering that Homer used to strengthen form and light. The scene of the boy and girl on the swing shows some loss of color from light exposure, what we call light struck, though it is consistent with works where Homer originally used very pale washes. The second work retains its color beautifully. You can still see the full range of greens, with only slight edge darkening from an old acidic matte. Where the gouache lies, it has preserved the original tone of the paper, revealing how the surrounding sheet has gently darkened over time.
Okay.
That's fair market value. That would be the range you might get in an auction.
Okay.
I would insure it for about $70,000. For this one, an auction estimate would be about $150,000 to $200,000.
Wow.
And I'd insure it for closer to $250,000.
Okay. That's pretty amazing. I don't think I would have guessed that.
It was a gift from my parents. They bought it here in Kansas City from the Hall's department store. I think probably in the mid-60s. They had seen it and it reminded them of the fact that I used to enjoy playing the piano late at night. The title says, "The melody haunts my reverie," which I think is their way of saying I was keeping them up.
Yeah. Many a sleepless nights listening to you play piano, is that it?
Right, just coincidental.
This is a screen print by Roy Lichtenstein, one of the defining American masters of pop art. Lichtenstein began his career in the 1940s and 1950s working in a more conventional abstract manner. But everything changed in the early 1960s when he returned to New York and adopted imagery drawn from comic books. Using the Ben-Day dot system, borrowed from commercial printing, he transformed mass culture into high art with clarity, irony, and precision. The print here is titled "The Melody Haunts My Reverie" and bears Lichtenstein's pencil signature at lower right, along with Roman numeral numbering, indicating it comes from the smaller, more exclusive edition. Produced in 1965, it is one of his earliest and most important pop art prints, issued as part of a group portfolio that included other major figures such as Andy Warhol. This places the work at a pivotal moment, when pop art was still controversial and not yet fully accepted by the art establishment. Technically, it is a color screen print, with layers of ink built up, one over another, creating a thick, tactile surface. That method is particularly vulnerable to wear, yet this example remains remarkably pristine. The image itself represents a watershed in Lichtenstein's career, capturing the moment when his comic-inspired language became fully realized. I've taken a close look at it, I've spent time looking at it, and it ranks among the best examples of any of these I've ever seen. And I would suggest that you have a replacement value on this of $300,000.
It's definitely going to remain in the family.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you have it, and it's a wonderful work. I'm glad you brought it in.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the good news.
They belonged to my grandmother, and I assume my grandfather, but he was deceased at that time, and she would let us children play with them and buy and sell them in a fake little store we had, you know, play store.
And where was this?
This was in Liège, Belgium.
Do you know anything about the artist?
He was Portuguese, I believe.
Yes.
Painted in Paris and visited Belgium around the 1920s.
These two paintings are by Amadeu de Sousa Cardoso, one of the most important Portuguese modernists of the early 20th century. Born in 1887, he trained initially in Lisbon before moving to Paris at a very young age, where he immersed himself in the most advanced artistic circles of his time. Although his life was tragically short, ending in 1918 due to the Spanish flu, his career was remarkably intense and productive. He worked alongside major figures such as Juan Gris and Amedeo Modigliani and took part in key exhibitions including the Salon des Indépendants and the 1913 Armory Show in New York. These paintings, executed in oil on board around 1910, belong to the height of Cubism in Europe. Cardoso visited Belgium during this period, and it is entirely plausible that these works were created during or shortly after that stay. Visually, they show a personal interpretation of Cubism with fractured forms, compressed space, and bold, unconventional color relationships. While the palette may feel challenging to some viewers, it reflects the experimental energy of the period and Cardoso's desire to push beyond academic norms. If I were going to put these two paintings at auction as a pair, I would put an estimate, which is a conservative estimate, of $200,000 to $300,000.
No. I mean, that is out of...
For the pair.
Oh my goodness.
I know there's an artist by the name of Lenora Carrington, and that she lived in Mexico. Originally, she came from Europe, but that she came to Mexico after the Second World War. Much more than that, I don't know, except I know that she was a surrealist.
Leonora Carrington was born in England in 1917 and became one of the most distinctive voices of surrealism. After early training in Europe and a formative relationship with Max Ernst, her life was deeply affected by the Second World War. Following a psychological breakdown, she eventually settled in Mexico, where she found both stability and artistic freedom. It was there that she produced much of her most personal and imaginative work, drawing heavily on dreams, mythology, and inner visions. The painting before us dates to 1961 and is signed by Carrington, placing it firmly within her mature Mexican period. Executed in oil on canvas, the surface carries a dense, nocturnal atmosphere. At the center stands a wolf-like creature with multiple limbs, a recurring symbol in her work that suggests transformation, instinct, and unease. Around it, smaller figures emerge from foliage, accompanied by bats, hybrid beings, and unsettling characters near the lower edge. These elements are arranged not as a narrative scene, but as fragments of a psychological landscape. What is especially compelling here is the macabre yet controlled composition. Carrington balances nightmare imagery with careful structure, revealing an artist confronting personal anxieties through symbolic form. This work exemplifies how her surrealism is less theatrical than Dali's and more inward, rooted in memory, trauma, and private mythology.
I believe they said they bought it somewhere around $7,000 to $10,000, which was a big price to pay for a painting. I'm sure my father had to think twice about it when he did it.
Right now, I would expect an auction estimate of $200,000 to $300,000 these days.
They bought well. Amazing.
Painting has been in my husband's family since the early 1900s. It was done by an artist named Nordfeld, who is a friend of my father-in-law.
And you inherited this?
Yes. When my in-laws died, then the paintings came to us. We have a couple of others of his works, too. when my husband was growing up, this was the scene that he always saw, and he didn't care for it that much. There were other nudes by Nordfeldt that we had that he liked better, but this one he didn't like so much.
Nordfeldt was born in Sweden and immigrated to the United States as a teenager, settling in Chicago, where his early work as a newspaper typesetter and illustrator led him toward formal study at the Art Institute of Chicago. Around 1900, he continued his training in Paris, absorbing modern European influences that later set his work apart from the more conservative tendencies of American painting at the time. In the early 20th century, he became closely associated with Provincetown, Massachusetts, a vital artist colony where he developed a distinctly modern visual language. This painting is especially compelling because it is executed on both sides of the canvas, a practice often adopted by artists with limited means. One side presents a more traditional, figurative composition, while the reverse reveals a Provincetown scene identifiable through its landmarks and coastal atmosphere. In this landscape, the structural influence of Cézanne is evident, while the bold, expressive use of color reflects the impact of Matisse. The handling is confident and modern, marking a clear shift away from American Impressionism toward early 20th century modernism. And whereas it used to be very focused on American Impressionist paintings, those pictures are much harder to find, and the taste has really changed. So buyers now are more focused on the segment of early 20th century market. So I think that it would not be surprising if this picture could sell for over $100,000 in a retail gallery.
What about the other side of it?
This is the important side.
You brought a painting here that was exhibited in a museum locally.
That's correct. It was on exhibit at the Carnegie Institute at the International Exhibition, and our grandmother purchased it in 1946.
You know who the artist is?
Yes, Rockwell Kent.
Right. You know what the subject is?
Yes, it's Greenland.
Rockwell Kent was an artist profoundly drawn to remote and austere landscapes, and this painting stands as a compelling expression of that lifelong pursuit. His hand is immediately evident in the monumental Greenland setting, a place he explored deeply, much like Tierra del Fuego or the Alps. Titled The Land of Peace, the work was completed in 1946 and reflects not only his command of rugged coastlines and expansive mountain forms, but also his convictions shaped by the aftermath of World War II. The composition introduces small human figures within the vastness of the land, something Kent did sparingly and with intention. These figures carry meaning. In a letter written to the purchaser, Kent describes the scene in remarkable detail, even noting the latitude and longitude of the location, but he also reflects on the idea of peace itself. As an avowed pacifist and openly declared communist at a time when such views were controversial, he contrasts the perceived harmony of Greenland and its people with what he describes as the periodic mass destruction practiced by so-called civilized societies. That moral commentary is inseparable from the image. The painting is executed in oil on canvas laid onto board, a format Kent often used when works were completed or refined after travel. The surface remains in fine condition, and the restrained yet luminous palette of blues, pinks, and reds reinforces a sense of calm and contemplation. It's attractive, it's a subject matter, but then what puts it over the top is this letter. As such, at auction, if it didn't have the letter, I'd probably say about $100,000 to $150,000. With the letter, I'd put about $150,000 to $250,000 as an estimate.
Oh my, wow, that's amazing. That's wonderful. Thank you.
It's just a super thing.
I like the color.
The colors, the colors are nice. You have the blues, and it picks up the pinks and the reds.
You've brought in this most fascinating painting by Francis A. Silva. Tell me a little bit about how you acquired it.
I inherited it from my father, and I got it about 3 years ago. He inherited another painting, which is here, from his father, and a gallery in New England offered to swap this picture for multiple other pictures so that my father and his sister and brother would then have other pictures to hand down to their children.
Silva was born in 1,835 inches, New York, largely self-trained, and began his career as a sign painter before serving in the Civil War. After 1865, he devoted himself fully to fine art, maintaining a studio in New York and later New Jersey, and became best known for tranquil coastal and harbor scenes painted along Narragansett Bay, Gloucester, and the New York Harbor region. This painting dates to 1874, a strong mid-career moment for Silva. It depicts a sailboat moving toward shore under shifting light, with Eastern Point Light marking the entrance to Gloucester Harbor. The lighthouse is a significant identifying feature, anchoring the scene geographically and historically in one of America's great fishing centers. What distinguishes this work is Silva's confident handling of contrast and atmosphere. While it lacks some of the warm peach and golden tones collectors often associate with his sunsets, it displays beautiful striations of light and a subtle sense of motion in the water. The inclusion of visible figures aboard the vessel is also notable, as Silva often placed his boats farther out at sea. From a condition standpoint, the painting has been lined, meaning a secondary canvas was applied to the back. The wax adhesive used at the time has migrated slightly, creating vertical striations, especially in the water. This is a known conservation issue and can be addressed through proper relining, even though some other parts of the market are not, and a gallery would probably sell it for around $250,000.
Smoke!
Yeah.
That's
The Innis was valued at what at that time?
about 80,000.
80. Well, I believe this would probably be in the 800,000 category. And as I recollect, it may even be in a museum at this point in time.
Wow.
The print has been in my family for many, many years. I acquired it to inheritance.
Now, were your parents collectors of this sort of thing, or?
No. Much of the interest comes from my grandfather, who was a member of the New York Society of Etchers way long time ago and began a collection at that time that I've been fortunate enough to inherit.
This is an etching by Edward Hopper, one of the most important American artists of the 20th century. Hopper is widely known for his paintings of quiet, solitary moments, but his reputation was first solidified through printmaking, especially etching, in the 1910s and 1920s. After studying in New York and traveling to Paris, his early career was difficult, and he supported himself largely as an illustrator. Around 1915, he turned seriously to etching, producing a small but highly significant body of work. This print, made in 1922 entitled The Catboat, belongs to that crucial period. It shows Hopper's preference for stark contrast, using deep black ink against bright white paper to create a strong sense of light, structure, and stillness. The composition feels restrained and observational, qualities that later defined his mature paintings. The impression here is richly inked with a small pencil signature typical of Hopper and possibly reworked, something he occasionally did when dissatisfied with the first signing. Printed in very small numbers, with likely fewer than 25 impressions known, this etching represents one of Hopper's most important graphic works from the most influential decade of his career as a printmaker. As an insurance value on this, and I would suggest insuring something like this, I would put an insurance value on it of $250,000.
Really?
Yes.
That's more money than belongs in my living room, I think.
It's a real masterpiece, and you're lucky to have that.
Wow. Goosebumps today.